Hi, this is another of my videos about The Walking Dead. I've recently begun reviewing episodes late in Season 2 of this series just because I saw some reviews online and thought I might like to add to some of the conversations that they began. My reviews tend to be a little different from most. Most of the reviews online really focus on the action, which is appropriate. This is really an action and suspense kind of series. But I was looking for reviews that dealt a little more with the ideas and the themes of The Walking Dead. I didn't really find much, so I thought I would do videos that were addressed more to that. So if you're looking just for the blood and guts stuff, I will address that, but I'm more interested in the ideas and the themes and the symbolism and things like that of the series. So if you're not into that, this video probably isn't for you. Before I begin, just a statement, lots and lots of spoilers in this. If you haven't seen all of Season 2, you should stop watching now or it'll ruin it for you. So basically, what I'm going to say in this, what I'm going to argue in this video is that Hershel's farm, where most of the action, almost all of the action of Season 2 takes place, is something that's known as a pastoral enclosure. A pastoral enclosure is a place in the countryside that's separated from the city. And the idea is that the enclosure, the pastoral enclosure in the country, is pure and uncontaminated and uncorrupted, and you go there for spiritual renewal. Things are chaste, which they don't turn out to be for long with Maggie and Glenn. The city, on the other hand, is evil and industrial, and it's a fallen world, as I say in one of my previous videos. And the idea is in the season, as it is true in the pastoral itself. The pastoral, as a sort of mode of writing and thinking, dates back a long time, at least to the ancient Greeks. So what I'm going to be arguing here, you're going to hear me say it a lot, is that this season pits the town where bad things happen and the farm, which is supposed to be safe from the bad things that happen in town. And we're going to see, of course, that turns out not to be true. So we'll start with the city. The season begins with the group having fled the CDC, which is self-destructed, and they're on the highway. They're heading to Fort Benning, and they're going through the countryside. So they're very clearly making a move, literally, from the city out into the country. And we see in a flashback that earlier exodus from the city, when Shane and Laurie go off the road and into the woods, and they can see into Atlanta, and the helicopters dropping napalm on the city. Well, that's a sign that they've given up hope. The military has given up hope in the city, and so have the people. So have the people in the group and the others around them. They thought the city would be safe. They have to go away from it now. Remember, bad things happen in town. And of course, Rick, in Season 1, goes into the city on horseback and meets up with the group, so that's good. But he nearly dies a whole bunch of times and sees that the city has been completely overrun. So we don't see much of the city in Season 2, but we see a lot of the town. And the town, although literally different from the city, is the same thematically or symbolically. That is, it's a place that is urban and not rural. It's still different from the farm. And, as I said, bad things happen in town. Here are a short list of bad things that happen in town. Well, Shane and Otis, right? They go to get the respirator, they're surrounded, and Shane makes this tough decision that some see as evil and some as slightly less evil, but he shoots Otis, so that's a bad thing. Maggie is attacked in town, right? She's attacked by the walker in the pharmacy. Glenn has to kill that walker. It's in the city that Hershel goes to get drunk after the massacre at the barn, right? And just going to drink itself is a corruption, right? He's been sober for so many years. But to go into town to do it really reinforces the town as a bad place. It's in the bar, of course, that the two guys from this other group come in the episode Nebraska, and they're clearly threatening Glenn, Hershel, and Rick has to kill the two of them in self-defense. The last thing, those are some literal things that happen. Of course, they also run into Randall in the city and bring him back to the farm, which is a really bad idea, but thematically important for reasons that I'll address in a few minutes. But those are the literal things that happen in the town, that are bad things that happen in the town. But there's one less literal one, and it's this. Laurie sends Glenn, and Maggie with him, into the town to get what Maggie calls the abortion pills. Doesn't matter what your view on abortion is, but the idea here, symbolically at least, is that you go to town to get the thing that will kill new life, or that will not allow new life. So the town is the place where very bad things happen. That's the town. Between the town and the farm is the highway. And in the early parts of this season, we see the group on the highway. So they're moving away from the CDC out into the countryside, headed to Fort Benning. And we see that, right? We see the highway and the cars, but we also see signs of the countryside. We see the grassy median, and we see on either side of the highway the countryside. And the best shot, a really good shot of this, is we see Daryl driving across our frame in his motorcycle, and in the background behind him, we see these lovely fields and trees, and they're really surrounded by the world of nature as they move out into the countryside. Eventually they get stopped in that snarl of traffic, and they get drawn off the highway when Sophia is chased by the walkers. And as they move off the highway, they don't do it all at once, they sort of, in dribs and drabs, move off the highway. They move into and toward the pastoral space. They've moved away from the city, now they're going to move away from the highway, and they're going to move closer and closer into what I'm going to call the pastoral enclosure of Hershel's farm. So shortly after they begin this move into the forest, of course, we see Carl looking at the deer. And I've talked about this in the previous a previous video, my review of season 2, episode 11, that's where I talked about it, where Carl is shot, right? He has this moment of innocence, then he's shot. Otis tells Rick to take Carl to Hershel, and we see these two shots that work really well together. One is Rick carrying Carl, who's bleeding all over the place, running through the fields toward the farm. And the other is a shot that we see, it's a really interesting shot. It's a shot that we see over the shoulder of a woman. We don't know who this woman is yet, but we learn that it's Maggie eventually. And the shot goes like this. It's over the shoulder of Maggie from the porch at the farmhouse. So it's over the shoulder, through the yard, to the barbed wire fence, to the fields that Rick is running through, then to the forest, and beyond the forest we know is the creek, and then the highway. Why is this important? Well, the pastoral enclosure is supposed to be fenced off or bounded off from the outside world that threatens to destroy it. And here we see a whole bunch of borders or spaces or fences between the farm and the outside world, right? So we see the house and the porch, and the yard, and the fence, and the field, and the trees, and beyond that, the creek, and then the highway, and then the city. So lots of boundaries between the farm and the outside world of the city where bad things happen. Another way that this episode really focuses on the idea of the pastoral is in some of the things that Hershel says and some of the things that are said to Hershel. So at one point, Hershel and Rick are sitting, I think, outside on the front steps, and Rick says to Hershel, they're looking out at the fields, and Rick says to Hershel, "This place is so beautiful. It's serene. It's untouched." Untouched is a really important word in the pastoral because, as I've said, the pastoral is separated by all of these borders from the outside world, and it's supposed to remain untouched by it. We're going to see that it gets touched, of course. We know that, they bring Randall back, so clearly there's contamination from the outside world, but more on that in a bit. The idea is that Rick says it's untouched, and that's important to the pastoral. Later on, Dale says to Hershel in the stable, as Hershel's tending the horses, Dale has learned about the walkers in the barn, and he says to Hershel, "You're cut off from the outside world." Think again of the farm as a pastoral enclosure, cut off from the outside world through all of these spaces and fences. Later on, as they're looking out over this panorama of the landscape, and Hershel is telling Rick, to stop and think a moment and think about God, Rick says to Hershel, "This farm is special. You've been cut off from what's going on out there." So Rick uses the exact same words that Dale does to Hershel. You're cut off. Being cut off in the world of the pastoral is a good thing, because how do you keep your refuge, your space of rejuvenation and rebirth, how do you keep that pure and uncontaminated? Well, you remain cut off from the outside world as much as you can. One other important thing about this setting is the farmhouse itself. Hershel wants to keep the group as far away from the house as he can while allowing them to be reasonably safe. He insists that they camp in the yard. It isn't until the second last episode of the series that we see him welcoming the group into the house. And I say more about that in my review of the Better Angels episode of season 2. But there's an important idea in the pastoral that the pastoral is home. Not just that it's different from the city, but it's a place that you go really to gather yourself and to be among friends and family and to be safe with them. So the farmhouse itself is obviously an example of home. But there's actually a subtle reminder of this, and it's in the scene where Shane is standing in the bathroom with the shower running, which is a bit like Psycho, and we see the camera pan across the wall, and there's a needle point. And the needle point shows the scene of a farm, and the text on the needle point says, "Wherever you wander, wherever you roam, be healthy and happy and glad to come home." So home is an important idea in the pastoral, and the picture on the needle point uses the word and shows us a picture of home. And it's a picture very much of the home that we see on the farm. There are fields, there's a barn, there are silos, there's a farmhouse. It is a farm. But what's interesting about the picture of this farm is that it has something that Hershel's farm doesn't. It has sheep in the picture. Why is this important? Well, in the tradition of the pastoral, there are a lot of sheep. And one of the kind of main images of the pastoral is the idea that sheep roam in the grass, watched over by a benevolent shepherd who tends to them. And in this space, the grass is always green, and the trees always bear fruit, and the shepherd is free from the outside world, and he protects his flock. And if that rings a bell for Christians out there, it's supposed to, because there's a pastoral tradition in Christianity, right? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, right? The idea as a congregation seen by its pastor, pastoral and pastor, they're connected. The pastoral guides his flock, his congregation, as a shepherd would protect sheep. So almost through here, I gotta hurry. So the pastoral space is bounded off. But as part of the tradition of the pastoral, remember at 2 points, Hershel says to Maggie and to Rick, this isn't permanent. That's important to the pastoral. Because as much as the pastoral is set off, untouched from the outside world always gets in somehow. It always contaminates that uncorrupted space. This is what I say in one of my early reviews. The fallen world of the outside gets into the pastoral. And in the pastoral, this is summed up in a line. I won't give you the Latin, but the line basically goes, I am also in the garden. And the I, the person speaking that, is death. Picture death, hood, scythe. I am also in the garden. So as much as things are alive and permanent in the pastoral space, in the garden, like the Garden of Eden, death always gets in somehow. It always becomes contaminated. And of course, we see this in lots of ways, even before things from the city are brought to the country. Probably the best example of this is the well. When they pull that horrible bloated walker out of the well, they want to not contaminate the well. Of course, it probably is already contaminated, but his guts go spilling into the well, and the well becomes contaminated. Water in Western culture is often associated with purity. Here, the water is contaminated. That's a symbol of the contamination of the farm. And we're going to see that happen more, right? We see there are walkers on the property. We see there are walkers in the barn. We see Shane and Rick bring Randall. We said the city is bad, don't want things from the city to get to the farm. Randall comes from the urban world, the fallen world, to the pastoral world, and of course disrupts it. He's largely responsible for Shane trying to engineer Rick's death and instead himself dying. And of course, the massacre at the barn is the biggest example, probably, of the contamination of this place. Hershel has tried to keep it safe from the outside world, has tried to treat the walkers simply as people who are sick. He says, well, we used to be afraid of AIDS. He wants to cure them. He believes in that ideal, just as Dale believed in an ideal. But the group brings with them the energies of the outside world, the corruption of the urban space into the pastoral. The massacre of walkers happens at the barn. Hershel becomes distraught, moves into the city to get drunk, brings back with him and Rick and Glenn the nastiness of the city in the form of Randall and all of the things that Randall, being present on the barn, sets in motion. That's it for now.